Hello, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to pick up items in Godot. So this method works with basically any inventory system that uses resources for the items. So for this example I'm going to be using Heartbeast's inventory system tutorial. And I've just set up a main scene that contains the inventory itself and the player character. And the player literally just moves around when you press the arrow keys, and that is it. So what we need to do first is create the items that are going to be in the world that we can actually pick up. So create a new scene, and this is going to be Kinematic Buddy 2D. And the items, obviously, since it's a Kinematic Buddy 2D, they're going to need a collision shape, and as well as a sprite. So for example, if we just look through the textures that were part of the tutorial, you can see that we have a sword.png, and if we just drag that into the texture, we have our item. Similarly, we're going to create a new collision shape. It really doesn't matter as long as it gets the job done. Or actually, this should be an area 2D. Change type to area 2D so that it doesn't actually collide with the player. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go into our project settings, and we need to create a different collision layer which will detect if the player comes into contact with an item. So if we go to layer names and then we go to 2D physics, we see we have all these layers. So layer 1 is just going to be world, which is just all of the physical objects in the world, like the player and a rock or something. And then layer 2, we'll set this to the player. And similarly, we're going to set layer 3 to item. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back here to the Kinematic Buddy 2D. We're going to go to the collision tab, and we're going to set it to the item layer. And what we're going to do is make it so in the mask, it's looking for a player layer. And now I'm just going to save this as base item.tscn, because we don't want to create a different object for every item that we're going to use. So now when we go back into our world, we can create a new object. So this object, I'm just going to call this once again, it's actually a static body 2D. I'm going to call this one a tree. And we're just going to move it over here. Once again, it needs a collision shape. It really doesn't matter what it is for this example. I'm just going to make it that. Also going to give it a sprite so that you can see it. And I'll just make it look like a potion. I'll make it smaller. Tree needs to be on world and look for world. Okay, so now when we run the scene, as you can see, the player can move and it will collide with the tree or potion. Okay, so now we want to make it so that the potion actually drops the base item or whatever item we want it to drop. So when we go into the world, we're going to go into tree and we're going to attach a script. And we'll just call this tree.gd. Yeah. So what we're going to say is, actually, yeah, let's go into 2D. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add an area 2D to the tree. And this area is just going to be it's not going to be on any layer, but it's going to be looking for the player. So whenever the player comes into the area, it will know. And then for the collision shape, we're going to just create a new one, another circle, and we'll make it bigger. Let's just make sure, yeah. Okay, So this area, whenever the player goes in, will tell the area 2D, and the tree that the player has entered the area. And to do that, we're going to use node on body entered. And we do that, and we attach it to the tree, and there we go. So on this, we're going to call a function to actually drop our items. So for now, we don't really have our function, but what we can do is we're going to define what the drop is, and we're going to call var drop, and we're going to set it to, we're going to have it preload the base item.tscn, and we're also going to tell it var, or no, here, we'll set this to base item, and then we're going to also preload for the actual item, so drop, and this time we're going to preload the actual TRES file. So for this example, we're just going to do that. So now we're going to call a function called drop item. So now we actually have to define that function. So drop item, and we can also say we have to pass in the actual item. So I'm just going to pass in drop. Once again, we're going to drop. So now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create an instance of the base item. So base item dot instance. This will just create a copy of whatever file that is. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go drop base item dot item equals drop, and that should be it. Oh, I forgot to put that. So now this should be all we need in the tree. Or actually, oops, forgot to actually instance the item. And what I'm going to do here is add get. We're going to tell the world to add a child, and we're going to do, oh, we have to set this to a variable. Base item instance equals base item dot instance. Oh, and there we go. And now what we're going to do is tell the world to drop the base item instance. Spelled it wrong. Base item instance. Now it should work. Okay, so at this point, we're just going to be adding a child of this base item. But over here, you can see that I've said base item dot item equals drop, and we never said any item in the base item. So over here, I'm just going to go like that, and I'm going to go, whoop, not this. I'm going to add a script, and this is going to be called base item.gd. That's fine. And we're just going to create a var item. So this will be set by the script that whatever is dropping this item. And in the ready function, we're going to do, or here, let's declare a few variables first. So first of all, we're going to do we're going to just set sprite to this sprite so that we don't have to do that multiple times. And now we can do func ready. We're going to set sprite dot texture equals, and then we're just going to do item dot texture. And on ready var. There we go. Now when we run the scene, hopefully, the potion should just create a new sword when we go in, and it did not do that. Okay, so this is probably because our player is not on the right layer. So if we go here, yep, as you can see, the player isn't actually on the player layer, so it didn't detect when the player went in. So let's try this again. Base item dot item equals drop, and it said invalid set index item. So that means the base item doesn't have an item according to this. So if we go into our base item, we do have an item. Okay, I see what the problem is. We're supposed to use base item instance here, and I had just left it on base item. I hadn't changed that yet. And now when we run it, it should create a sword. There you go. It's not in the right position, but as you can see, it did create a sword, and it will keep doing so every time we enter. Anyways, so the next thing we can do is we can actually say in the world, we go into our tree, and we say right here, before we add the child, we can set as many properties of that child as we want. So if we want to do base item and we want to set its position, now as you can see, when we enter the item's position, the item will drop in the right position. So now we have to actually pick up the item and add it to the player's inventory, but before I do that, I'm going to see why I'm getting errors. Okay, yeah, so area set shape disabled, and it wants us to use call deferred. So that's what we're going to do. So the meaning of that error was that we can't just instance objects whenever we want, we have to do it at the right time. So this call deferred function fixes that, and to do that, all you have to do is put the name of the method and followed by the whatever inputs you want to give to that method. So now if we run it, you can see that there's no more errors when we spawn the item in. Okay, now we can get to actually picking up the items. First, we go to inventory.gd and we're going to create a new function. We're going to call it func add item. And in this function, all we're going to do is loop through the items and add the item in the correct spot. So what we want to do is for I in range length of inventory. That's the wrong thing. Oh wait, we are in the inventory. So for I in range len items. Alright, so we're gonna loop through items. Or I is just gonna be a number that counts up, which is which number slot you're on. Alright, and then we're gonna do if items I, which is referring to the actual item that we're looking at right now, dot name equals item dot name, and this item we're actually going to call with the function, so we're just going to put an item there. So then what we're going to do is we're going to do items I dot amount plus equals 1. So if the item in that slot has the same name as this item, then we're just going to add it. And then once we do that, we're just going to break and leave this. So to check that we've already added it, we're going to create a variable item added, and we're going to set it to false. And once we actually add it, we're going to set this to true. But what happens if we don't have an item that shares the same name in our inventory? Well, in that case, okay, I forgot to write that. Well, in that case, what we're going to do is we're going to go if item added equals false, we're going to go through the inventory again. I in range len of items. This time we're going to look for if items I equals null. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to set that item to the item. So and the set item function was already declared above, so we're just going to do set item, and then you need the index, because as you can see in this function we need the index and the item. So item set item I, which is the number of slot that we're on, and we're going to set it to item. And then we're just going to set to true. And I just have to fix that. So this should add the items to our inventory. And if none of these clauses work, then we'll just leave the item in the world. But now we have to see, over here I wrote if item.name equals item, if items I.name equals item.name. But if there's nothing there in that slot, then the code will break. So right before then we just have to make sure if items I does not equal null. So if there's an actual item in the slot. And this should be everything for the add item. Now what we're going to do is go back to the world, and we're going to go no, actually let's go to the base item, and on the ready function we're just going to now on our collision shape I'm just making sure that we set it to the right spots. Yep, okay. What we need to do is we need to find the body entered, and this is the right one, and we connect it. So whenever anything enters, so meaning when the player enters, we're going to do inventory. Oh, first it needs to know what the inventory is. So our inventory, reload, and we're just going to give it inventory.tres, which is the resource file. So when that enters, add item, which is the new function that we made, and we're going to give it the item. And let's see if this works. So you'll see that when we go in, the item gets created, but you don't see it getting added to the inventory. Well, the first reason is because we aren't actually deleting the world object. And the second reason is that, as you can see, it did add, but the display did not update. So first of all, what we're going to do is if inventory.addItem, which this function will return true if it actually works. So if you can add the item, then we're just going to delete this world object. And if we go back into inventory.gd, we'll just do return true every time we've added an item. return true, and over here I'll also add a break. And true and break. Okay, so that should be good. When we go back into our, where is it? Back into our base item, there it is. The display still won't update, but this time, as you can see, the object is being deleted and we should have 4 swords. Yep. So what we want to do is update the display, and to do that we have to call the items changed function, or emit the items change signal. So what we're going to do is right before we return true, we're going to just emit the same signal, but this time we're going to use the index of I, and we're going to do, and since it's in a list, we don't have any other places, so we're just going to do I. And once again, when we on this clause, we go right before we return true, emit signal, items changed with I. Now it should be updating the inventory display, and on this event on items changed, we're going to just update inventory slot display. Hopefully this should work properly. And as you can see, we just got a sword, and then if we go back into the area, we just got another sword, and another sword, and another sword. And yep, that's it. That's how you add items to an inventory in Godot.